Hello, Carrie. Hello, everyone. We're back at it again, and now we're starting to go into the last corner board of the Four Corners expansion, and we are now focused on fate and destiny and what it actually awaits for you. And that, more specifically, is the Woodland Expansion. As always, before we even get started on what exactly the Woodlands entails, I always like to go over the characters first, if you know that about me. So there are 5 characters that are in this particular expansion. We first have the Spider Queen. We have the Ancient Oak. We have the Scout. We have the Totem Warrior. And then lastly, the character that I'm currently playing as in the game that I'm playing with my family, the Laywalker. Now, these might simply just be 5 characters, but there's more to them than that. In fact, the whole thing that makes the Woodlands characters so exclusive and a lot more unique is that they have their own abilities, they have their own set of tokens. So you get 3 Totem Spirit tokens that go to the Totem Warrior. You get 3 of these Portal tokens that go to the Laywalker. You get 5 Hidden Path tokens that go to the Scout. You also get 5 growth tokens for the Ancient Oak that are double-sided. And you also get 6 spider tokens, which has a web side and a crawler side that goes with the Spider Queen. And they are literally the only characters in Talisman that have these tokens that represent different things for the characters and grants them abilities that other characters in Talisman wouldn't otherwise have. And it helps them all out in each their own separate ways. On top of this, we also have the 3 brand new alternate endings that go along with the Woodlands. We have the revealed ending in the Wanderlust, which requires us to play with all 4 corners of the dungeon, the highland, the city, and this expansion. We have an alternate ending in the War of Seasons, which ties into the lore between King Oberon and King Oberon and Queen Titania. I always get that mixed up at times. And remember, this doesn't have a sun or a moon, so this is just an alternate ending that can be used as either a hidden or revealed ending. And then we have the hidden ending, Judged by Fate. So like I mentioned in my previous expansion videos, and I'm going to cover it in this one too, if for whatever reason you didn't want to play with the entirety of the Woodlands expansion, then these 5 characters, along with their character tokens, because it is exclusive only to them, and the 3 alternate endings are what you would be able to either use in combination or as an either-or type of situation. On top of that, we get a total of 103 woodland cards that are completely separate from any of the other 3 corners and separate from the main board, things like that. We also get a total of 20 path cards. These are just a couple of them. We also get 5 spell cards, which I can't show you as I'm in the middle of my game with my family, so that's already all merged in with the spell deck that we have over there, as well as the 10 adventure cards, which are also merged into the game that we're currently playing. So this is the woodland board itself. So as you can see, like we have labeled with the city, the highlands, and the dungeon, the woodland entrance is facing the forest, which is this forest face up here, in how this board's set up. And also at the same time, if you can see rather closely, they're kind of obvious, the green arrows right here, which indicate the path that you follow. Much like the highlands and the dungeon, you can go back and forth, either going with or against the arrows to make it all the way through the woodlands. And the woodland also is its own separate region, just like the other 3 corners. So any events that happen that say region-based only affects the woodlands. And it's definitely an area that you can run into when we talked about the Harbinger and that sort of thing. So now, of course, when it comes to setup, you have that board. Place these to the side as you draw these from while you're in the woodlands. And now, I'll go into how exactly you enter the woodlands. So, much like the other corners, it's simple. You just adequately roll high enough, and then you make your way into the woodlands. And then, like I showed earlier, you follow the arrows, then you make your way all the way through. However, this is where things start to become different, because one fundamental mechanic is changed with the addition of the woodlands. So originally back in the base game, when we had talked about how fate essentially is your reroll, that is still the case. However, with this side, have you also noticed that there's also this side to the fate as well? Originally, it didn't have any significant value, but now it does. With fate, now, with the light and the dark side, there's now this thing called fate alignments that is very, very important just over the course of the game, as well as just important inside of the woodlands itself. So, this other side that I had showed is known as dark fate. So whenever you have your fate value, let's say our character has a fate of 2, instead of just having these 2 sides, you can mix and match and choose which ones that you want. And this becomes important for these specific reasons. If you have more light fate than you do dark fate, then you are light bound. If you have more dark fate than light fate, then you are dark bound. If you have an even amount of light and dark fate, you're unbound. And if you have no fate at all, you're fateless. And here's why this starts to become important. With dark fate, just an individual piece of dark fate, instead of being able to re-roll for yourself, you can use dark fate against other players in order to re-roll their die when it comes to attacking, whether they're interacting with certain spaces or spells or that sort of thing. You can use dark fate against them to force a re-roll. However, that only works if they hadn't already used light fate. So, for example, if I thought that my roll as the totem warrior wasn't sufficient and I used light fate to re-roll, because I have to accept that new result because I used light fate, other players can't use dark fate. But if I had rolled and was happy and didn't use light fate, then other players can have the opportunity to use Dark Fate in that moment. So it's got its caveats. But more importantly, moving back to the Woodlands itself, whenever you enter the Woodlands, the path cards that I showed earlier, there's always going to be 3 to pick from, and you have to pick one for while you're in the Woodlands. And then just for example, I'll pick the Path of Respite just to show you guys. So there's always going to be a bit of flavor text at the top, but these two, the 2 lines below it, are your conditions while you're inside the Woodlands, and then when you reach the meeting with Destiny space, what your end conditions are there. Because your entire goal, if the Woodlands is the path that you're trying to go on, is to reach the meeting with Destiny space. So the path that you pick essentially becomes important with how easy or how difficult the Woodlands is going to be for you, on top of the knowing what your fate alignment is. Because, for example, let's say that I landed on the thicket here, and this is the enemy that I drew. As you can see here, there's a little dark spot and a little light spot. Those essentially are the 2 fate alignments, consequences or rewards that are affected based on your fate alignment. So this dark spot says gain 1 fate, meaning that if you're dark bound, you gain 1 fate from this battle. And if you're light bound, it's that white spot. That's the text that you read. Generally, when it comes to characters who are unbound or are fateless, it'll either have a 3rd layer of text that will specify, or you just treat it as a normal encounter and you miss out on either of the rewards, whether you're light bound or dark bound. So there are a huge amount of enemies and events and things of that nature inside of the Woodlands that is entirely based on your fate alignment and can either be really good or really bad for you. So the Woodlands, I'd say, if we're comparing difficulty, I wouldn't necessarily say it's the most difficult, but because it entirely relies on fate alignment and uses up a lot of magic, it is definitely the most bizarre and game-changing corner. As for example, there's an event inside of the Woodland deck that can change the entire alternate ending of the game. So what you thought to be true and what you thought was the requirement could completely shift just off of 1 card. There's cards inside the Woodlands that can change your character entirely for 3 turns. Or there's the Toad King who can transform you into a toad. If you're a regular player, or if you're a toad, you can gain stats from him when you turn back because of the Toad King. So there are a lot of bizarre and very unusual methods that are very much either an assistance for you, or it can also kind of be a hindrance. So moving onwards, so we had the fate alignments, and we talked about how important that was, and how moving through the Woodlands is much like the dungeon or the Highlands, where you can travel with or against the arrows and interact with the various spaces in the respective decks. So when you get to the very end and you reach the meeting with Destiny space, your path card, like I had mentioned, is always going to have that 3rd layer of text, which essentially is going to explain to you what your end conditions are and what rewards you'll gain for resolving them. So sometimes, depending on the path that you pick, you might have to fight a boss. Or the Woodlands might require something of you, like you might have to pay 5 gold, or you might need a specific magic object or a certain amount of trophy points in order to meet the qualifications of the meeting with Destiny space. It's always going to be different every time. And then once you resolve it, you essentially listen to the path card. But if the path card doesn't specify anything, as far as if you're teleported to any specific space or anything like that, then you just come from the meeting with Destiny space back to the forest space to where you can come back and try your hand again in the Woodlands, picking your path card when you come in, and then trying to make your way to the meeting with Destiny Space again. Note, just like the city with the wanted posters, there's always going to be 3 paths. So whenever you enter, you have to always make sure that whichever path that you pick, you always replenish 1 path. At the same time, if you leave the Woodlands, you think maybe your fate alignment isn't working out for you, or maybe the path that you've got isn't working out for you, and you leave the Woodlands, you have to discard the path that you took, because it's only effective while you're in the Woodlands. But the more important bit, the real prize for coming back here to the meeting with Destiny Space, are these Destiny cards right here. Now, the reason that you want these Destiny cards, of course, is that it has its own stat boosts and different sorts of abilities. But if at any time, whether it be through the Reaper or maybe the Werewolf or any of the other dangers of the other expansions, if you're thinking big picture or even just as small as the Woodlands or another character kills you off, generally you have to drop all your gold and all your objects. But any destinies that you've collected carry over into the respawn of your next character. Meaning that if you get a stronger character, let's say if I'm the Totem Warrior, I die, and I get a higher strength character like the Ancient Oak is my next character. Whatever abilities and stat boosts that I had with the Totem Warrior, with my destiny, transfers over to the Ancient Oak. It's honestly very good. Especially when you find certain destiny combinations work really well together. And it's honestly just one of the best mechanics of the Woodlands itself, is trying to find these destinies and being able to find the right combinations to be able to carry over to next characters, just as a backup plan. So this is definitely one of the corners that I would recommend visiting, more so depending on your stats. You kind of want to be higher stats in regards to just being able to take on these threats, but also you want to also be well equipped to be able to face any of the fate alignment challenges and the different things that can completely change the way that you play, because that's just how this corner operates. It's such a game changer in the light fate and dark fate mechanics and the fate alignments, in the path cards, and how you interact with the meeting with Destiny Space. So honestly, this is my favorite corner because of all of those various different elements. And hopefully you might be able to find that the Woodlands might be something interesting to you too. So Carrie, if you're watching this, or if anybody who's interested in Talisman in general is watching, maybe this might be the corner for you. But I definitely recommend getting some experience with just mastering the basics of the fate mechanics and that sort of thing. Because once you start having light and dark fate, the game starts to become a bit more cutthroat. Because now you have to think, okay, I can roll and get to a certain place, but do any other players have dark fate? And will they find any benefits in spending dark fate and either making me overroll or underroll? Like maybe there's an enemy that I'm trying to beat, but the other players don't want me to, so they use dark fate and they make me lose a battle. Or if you're trying to land on objects that have been dropped or left over from a previously killed character, they might make you over or underroll to where you fall short, or skip over it entirely. But it could also make the meeting with Destiny requirements a bit more difficult too. So there's just a lot of ways that dark fate can be used that you want to be aware of. Not just for the defensive end, but for yourself in regards to how you play. So overall, I really do love the Woodlands expansion, and the last video that I'm going to cover is the Cataclysm expansion. So hopefully with that video, that will cover all 14 expansions inside of the entirety of Talisman, and you can kind of just pick and choose based on the videos which ones that you prefer best. But other than that, hope to see you guys next time when we do the Cataclysm.